Good evening and welcome to Independent Special Roundtable Discussion. I am your host, Aminata. I am the Communication Officer for the Ministry of Transport, Works and Infrastructure. Um, Welcome to the show, gentlemen. With me in the panel, I have Madi Jobarteh, um, and also joining us is Hassoum, Dr. Hassoum Ceesay, and of course the famous Dr. Ensa Touray. Um, Welcome to the show, gentlemen. For starters, we have just a few rules on the show here. Sorry, lest I forget, we also have Dr. Sekuba, who is an economist.
Welcome.
Thank you, Doctor. So it's Gambia's 59th independence anniversary. Our topic will be discussing a lot of issues here. I have a wealth of experience in the House today. We'll be discussing things from the economy, law reforms, the culture, the present and the future. We'll be having some thought-provoking discussions here today. So without taking much of your time, I would allow Madi Jabati to first introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself in summary before we go to the rest of the panelists. Madi, you're
Okay.
welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here with this great gentleman. It looks like I'll be more of a listener here. We have our greatest historians on the platform. So, yeah, but my name is Madi Jobarteh. So, I think I would say I am an advocate for human rights, for democracy, for good governance in the civil society. So, that has been my engagement. Yeah. And of course, originally from
Madi,
Boraba.
thank you very much. I nearly said that. Thank you so much. Proud native of what about that. So next on the line, we will have Dr. Ensa Touray. Doctor, can you, I know you're a man of many hats, but can you briefly tell
Thank
us?
you so much. My name is Dr. Ensa Touray. I am currently a senior lecturer at the University of the Gambia, lecturing history. Happy to be part of the colleagues who will be presenting on the independent analysis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Touray. We will move to our next historian, Dr. Hassoum Ceesay. He's the Director General of the National Center for Arts and Culture. Doctor, can you please?
Hassoum Ceesay here. I'm very, very happy for this great, panel to go with you through the history of the struggle for independence and after. Yeah, thank you all very much.
You're welcome, Doctor. And next on my panel guest is Dr. Siaka. He's an economist. Mr. Ba, you're welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. By correction, I'm not yet a doctor. I am Mr. Ba, Siaka.
My bad.
Yes, I am Mr. Ba, and I am an economist and a citizen. And I work for Central Bank also. And I am glad to be part of this discussion. And I am glad that I have met my seniors here. Hassoum was my teacher in Armitage High School. And Madi is my senior and in-law. So Dr. Touray, I know him. Dr. Ensa is a colleague.
Thank you very much, our listeners and my co-panelists. Just to remind our viewers that this is the Gambia Center for Research and Policy Studies roundtable discussion on the Gambia's 59th independence celebration. And today, like I said, we'll be discussing about the Gambia from the economic development, law, education, arts and culture. We'll look at a retrospective of the Gambia, the present, and also the future. So we would start with Dr. Ensa Touray. As a historian, can you briefly describe the ideology of the New Gambia? It's a political and also a government philosophy, Or basically, can you, how is the New Gambia compared to the Gambia after 1965? Doctor, I can't hear you.
All Gambia, I don't know what actually you mean in context, but today we are actually approaching the independent reflection on actually what has been accomplished from the 1965, or some people call what the 1970. I think Madi is still holding on to 1970 as a Republican independent. And then although many people consider this day
Definitely.
as actually not a Republican independent, but what we need to understand as far as Gambian independence is concerned, people to need to first of all look at what independence constitute conceptually. What were the Gambian elites who were actually yearning for independence? What were they actually struggling to actually attain? What was taken from the Gambians that might have constituted their dependence on the foreign force that actually dominate their political and economic life? What were they? Because when you talk about independence, means some of the things or some of the sovereign rights were actually taken out from you. Two things in the latter part of the 19th century. There was an economic change after the slavery, where colonial powers were only yearning to actually use industrial West Africa as a zone to extract raw material, and that of use Africa as a market for their industrial commodities. In that situation, they had to actually adopt a new economic and political relation with the people of West Africa and the Gambia in particular. In this situation, first of all, in order to ensure the thrive of their economic dominance, first of all, they need to control people politically. That will actually enhance them to influence authorities and decision over the people. This led to the actual overthrow of the traditional leaders, and they institute dismember the Gambia. Not only that, but try to carve an area according to the needs and their demand industrially, and Gambia became a kind of a narrow path, leading to the creation of a Gambia, and a new political governance was actually established. And we need to understand this thing in context. For example, in this situation, Gambians used to have their sovereign mandate to elect their kings from their own traditional constitutional system. But with the rise of the colonial system, our mandate was completely destroyed, and structural change in political control was actually instituted, leading to the colonial hegemony in which Gambia was divided into two, that is North and the South Bank, and it was dismembered into the district, and they were actually electing our chiefs, and they had the mandate, even the commissioners. So which means that this was the time and the epoch that marked the end of our sovereign political mandate, territorial jurisdiction, leading to the colonial congress. And the governor was the one, although political decentralization was actually instituted, but in a despotic form because people didn't have any right to choose or elect their leader. That marked the end of our political independence. Because in this situation, they created a new power structure that led to the European or British domination in the Gambia. One that actually, which means anytime people or elites emerge, what they should have taught, what has actually been taken is our political mandate that should be restored. It must be studied and reinstituted according to the context, traditionally or whatever. But we have to understand that this political control and domination was instituted so that actually Gambia will not have right to choose to identify or to choose their own production system. But it is instituted to respond to European economic production system centered on peanut, leading to the decline of the rice production. So you can understand that this also marked the end of our economic independence. So a particular product that was actually needed or that were needed by the European industrial forces were actually forced to be instituted here at the expense of our staple, leading to our dependence on the global capitalist market that constitute our periphery. So when we emerge as periphery of the world system in that context, so which means we lost our political independence, we lost our economic independence. So those who in 1965 were struggling to restore our independence should have actually conceived or studied to understand actually what was actually taken from us. That's why any independence that was not actually contested or situated to be situated according to the knowledge of the history and the people, that independence will never be realized. It will just be a kind of deracialized independence. So our analysis today should be based on these things. What are our independence in 1965? What was the character of the independence in 1965? Was it actually
So
deracialized independence? What constitutes a deracialized independence? When you talk about deracialized, that is assumption or occupation or replacement of a white man by the black elite. Or did that actually constitute the structural change in politics that will restore and show the African character of independence, which needs to be understood in this particular case? That's why in Africa, when we look at the context of independence, one has to understand that there were two major forces in the struggle for independence. You had African personalities and that of the capitalist personalities. So let us look at generally whether our independence and the character of independence, was it actually deracialized, that is replacing a white man, and maintaining the institutional structures that actually end the mandate in every
this
aspect
question, Doctor.
of our political life, our economic life. And the not one, in terms of another character, which forces and the elites now that actually constitute Gambian independence, was it actually led by the capitalist personalities who were there to take over the power or mandate given by the people, at the same time centralize the political governance and in a despotic manner, but maintaining colonial structures of power against the people. Because when you say white man left, the few elite were ruling. White people were not actually majority. Sophistication that actually underpinned their hegemonic control or hegemonic dominance was that actually constitute their domination. What actually constitute the domination of those elite who came to power? And we know the issue. Did they actually maintain the colonial system and the structure, or did they actually change? That might have actually led people to restore their popular mandate.
That will take us to our next discussion with you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ensa. It's always very difficult to moderate historians because they have a wealth of experience and knowledge with facts to share. So that would bring us to your next discussion with us. But for now, we'll move on to Madi Jobarteh. So, Madi Jobarteh, Mr. Jobarteh, whenever we talk, what are your thoughts on the relationship between the Gambia Central and the local government councils? We want to know, do they each handle appropriate responsibilities as it is now, and how would you improve the distribution of the resources as well?
Well, let me say.
Would you like me to reframe my question?
That's fine.
So I'm just asking for your thoughts on the relationship between the Gambia and the central government, and also the local councils, as we've understood recent issues that are burning issues that are happening between the council and also the central government. Do they handle their responsibilities as expected?
Yeah, thank you. So the Constitution of the Gambia envisages a decentralized local government system. It's stated in the Constitution, I think must be section 168 or so. So that there is the central government and then there are local governments which some powers are given to manage the local government area in order to provide certain services, which are all identified in the Local Government Act, which came to be created in 2002. But the reality is, both the central government and the local governments are not fully effectively fulfilling their responsibilities as far as the Constitution or the Local Government Act are concerned. So that consequently, the necessary services that Gambians should enjoy from these two entities are not being provided as required. So one can point to many instances in the Local Government Act or provisions of the Local Government Act just to highlight how that is not the case. For example, when you look at education or healthcare or forest management or cleansing services, the Local Government Act provides that as local government area councils will take over all education institutions and education service in that area, which is not the case. But also, if you look at the act, it will tell you that the central government should provide 25% of the development budget of the local government areas, and the central government is not providing that. Furthermore, you would have seen the central government, particularly since during Jammeh's time, removed a number of revenue sources away from local governments and put it under either GRA or the police or Gambia Tourism Board, thereby denying the local councils the necessary resources in order to build capacity and deliver services. But at the same time, local government councils also are supposed to be transparent and accountable to the residents of the local government area. And again, this is not the case. They are not transparent enough to their residents. So there are problems on both sides. And then we've seen over the past few years to now the interference, which was happening, but taken to a new level under the current government dispensation. All right. I'm sure we all know how the central government, the Ministry of Local Government particularly, has interfered with local councils in the delivery of services, but also in the management of these councils, particularly when it comes to corruption and so on. Not to forget the fact that the local councils are fantastically corrupt, just like the central government itself. So at the end of the day, what we have really is two huge entities, local government and central, which are consuming huge resources, given mandate to serve the people, and they are not serving the people as required by law, and which is rather unfortunate. So for me, the relationship, in one sense, it is not cordial as it's supposed to be. In another sense, it is not well defined because I have a lot of issues with the Local Government Act that I would have thought a proper decentralization system should not have certain powers and authority given to the central government over the local councils. But at the same time, I have a lot of issues in terms of local councils in fulfilling, in delivering goods and services to people. That is, they are not well structured. So we have a very, therefore, a clumsy, a contradictory situation of two institutions that are responsible for the development of this country. So what that means, what it requires really are reforms. We need legal reforms and institutional reforms of the local government system, which unfortunately has not happened until now. So I don't know whether that speaks to your question, but I just want to say these things. Yeah.
I didn't hear the last bit of the conversation, but I'm sure it must have been very. We will move on to Dr. Touray. We will go back to you. Your analysis were very, very insightful. So, Doctor, is the question that normally triggers one's mind is the Gambia truly an independent state? And in what ways, if it is independent, and if it is not?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, what we talk about when we come to the independence of a nation, as far as Gambia is concerned, because both political and economic independence, we are taken away from them in the struggle to actually ensure European capitalist economic exploitation in order to respond to their industrial need in Europe. That's where we understand that they've already conquered and dismembered the Gambia and they govern Gambia to ensure peanut, which actually constitute the demand, and other thing that is a commodity trade that actually where they are commodity. But what is important here is that an independence that was supposed to be given to the Gambia, or what Gambians should assume, first of all, to restore a governance that would actually constitute popular mandate of the people. And you have to understand that after the departure of white man, the PPP government maintained a similar structure of power, where actually commissioners were actually appointed. A peanut which was to actually serve what was also maintained. In spite of that, Gambia remained to be depending on the capitalist market for the importation of rice. As far as we continue to depend on that, so there's no way that we can say that Gambia is economically independent. Are we economically independent after when we are actually importing the rice and we are depending on the capitalist market for the importation of rice? And you have to understand
How about politically?
We were not, because you have to understand that the mandate of the people, Sadauda government was actually appointing the commissioners. He was appointing the governors. Sadauda, and even sometimes they appoint the chiefs. Election was already only organized for representative and the president. And that was the only way people exercised their sovereign mandate. At the end of the day, power was actually centralized in the urban area in Banjul, and then the Banjul remained to be Banjul and the other urban combo area remained to be urban setting. And what happened if you look at the structural analysis, colonial system created two that is bifurcated state. One that is protectorate, which actually constitute the rural population, and that of the colony from Lamen to Banjul, for example. But after the independence, so-called independence, we understand that they maintain similar sectional structures where Banjul, Como area remained to be urban, and the protectorate area, which represent the rural population, still maintained as rural. So all the development, even the decision on whatever for development, were actually decided in the Combo area, and this led to the dissipation of the rural, and even the major centers in the rural area were completely dissipated. That constituted the rise of the massive urbanization. You can understand that colony serve today is the urban area. The protectorate serve as a rural area, and these structures are still maintained. You can understand that Combo, which was an urban and which was a colony, actually maintained its character, its structural position that it assumed as far as urban centers are concerned. So, which means that development was not actually centralized. Power was not actually decentralized. Power has been centralized in the urban area, and everything as far as development was concerned was decided in the urban area. So, where is the change as far as that was concerned? And then you know that still now the commissioners are appointed, and then sometimes the chiefs are appointed. So what we are talking about here, you can understand that's where you can see the difference between African personalities and the capitalist personality. Sadauda and his members actually demonstrated character of capitalist personalities, where the elite population, who were the minority, had the opportunity to be educated, did not actually allow they assume the position of the colonial masters, where you have to understand that they don't reflect on the history of the people. They didn't reflect on the culture of the people. What they had to do is to maintain the colonial structure of power. At the end of the day, what happened? You have to understand, Kwame Nkrumah understood the history of Africa, history of Ghana. Sekou Touré, the same thing you can understand. That is why what they pursue in order to generate independence for a nation, first of all, Kwame Nkrumah, that is academic institution at the highest level. No, that's why you got science and technology, in order to build capacity for the people. You can't actually generate independence when you don't build internal capacity of the people. Gambia remained from 1965 up to 1994. Gambia never had any university education. And you cannot derive a nation state for independence if you don't institute a Republican independence, where the specific focus of the study in every existence of that nation is actually studied. For example, when you build University of the Gambia, you know that any agricultural department or faculty will focus on the study of Gambian agriculture. But since from 1965, it has not been in place. Change towards independence. In Ghana, energy was actually established at Okosombo Dam in order to, once you build capacity, and then you have the internal resources, and to manipulate those things for economic development.
Aminata?
Kwame Nkrumah, in the actual situation, tried to respond to the industrial need of the people, which was actually lacking in the Gambia. We remain to be economically and politically dependent because the loans that we are taking right now from the white people is actually constraining us for industrialization, leading us to be dependent. And once you are dependent, you are dictated in every aspect of your national policy. So independence today, I don't consider it independent. I consider it as de-racialized independent, where white man left and the African assume and maintain the structure of power of the white man.
Thank you very much, Ensa Touray there. The theme for discussion is the Gambia's independence, looking at the history, the legal reforms, the leadership and governance. And of course, according to Ensa, he's saying that the Gambia is not independent. Talking about the reforms, you did mention that we need a lot of reforms. Could you just provide us an overview of? I'm sure this was supposed to be for Dr. Satang Nabaneh. Unfortunately, she could not join us today. due to some health issues that she's battling with. We wish her a speedy recovery. But Madi, can you please provide just an overview of the Gambia's legal system, and also maybe some advancements that have been made in terms of legal reforms, since independence?
Yeah, thanks. So, as you know, I consider 1970 as our date of independence. So, of course, we have the 1970 Constitution as the supreme law of the land. But it is to say that by the time we gained independence in 1970, there were already laws and institutions in place, colonial laws and institutions. And so a lot of the laws amended, not in any significant way. For example, if you look at the Public Order Act, which probably was created in the 30s, or the Police Act, and so on, you will realize that what happened was that where in the law it says Her Majesty, they would replace it with the President. Where it says Her Majesty's government will be replaced with the Gambia government, and so on. So if you look at the Public Order Act today, you compare it to 1933, probably the big difference would be President versus Majesty, government versus Her Majesty's government. So to a large extent, I think in the First Republic, not much legal reforms or institutional reforms were done. I mean, I would encourage listeners to attempt to read Jawara's book Kairaba, and where he talked about a number of structures, institutions of his government. For example, there was the Ministry of Economic Planning and Industrial Development, things like that. But largely, the laws continued and until 1994, when we had a new, military coup, and then 96, 97, a new constitution came into force. And a lot of those laws also continued. So that, for example, if you look at the Indemnity Act, you will realize that which was a colonial law, which was amended briefly in 1982 by Jawara's government to take care of the 1981 insurrection. And then again in 2001, by the Jammeh government to take care of to indemnify perpetrators of the April 2000 student massacre. And so until now, the Indemnity Act remains as it is. But it is to say, we continued on that path. During Jammeh's time, some other laws may have been created, largely dealing with service sector laws, or public management laws, stuff like that. But then when it comes to fundamental human rights laws, laws that would seek to bring a lot more transparency, accountability for the government, on the government, a lot of those laws, such laws were not really created. Yeah. So then we went through all of that until 2016, 17, when now we have a new government. Now, of course, one of the key objectives of the coalition in 2016 was to embark on a massive legal and institutional reforms, because it's very clear that since independence, we don't really have a proper set of laws and institutions that would really encourage democracy and good governance, to a significant level. So it is just natural that in a situation like that, heading towards, 2016, or changing that government, that legal and institutional reforms take place. Now, when this new government took over in 2017, it is, I would say, a lot more reforms took place under this regime than under Jawara or under Jammeh, but it is still hopelessly low in terms of the reforms that have taken place. So, for example, in the Public Order Act, Officer Secrets Act, Indemnity Act, the Police Act remains the same. And saying the Police Act, one can speak of the security sector institutions, so that, the NIA Act, the Gambia Armed Forces Act, and so on, all remain in place. Legal reforms did not take a lot, in that area, but it's to recognize that some significant laws were created under this government, and one is the Access to Information Act, all right, and then the Prevention of Torture Act, as well as the Persons with Disabilities Act. These are three very significant laws that have taken place. While at the same time, some terrible laws were came to be created, such as the Commission of Inquiry Act, which were amended in a way that does not serve accountability and transparency, or the Office of the Former President's Act, which also doesn't serve the best interests of the Gambia, and so on. Yeah, but apart from the legal reforms, it should also translate into institutional reforms, so that until now, the Access to Information Act, yes, it is created, but it requires that there is an information commission created, which has not been the case. And then, of course, yes, I know they now call NIA SIS, which is illegal, because in the constitution, the name given to that body is a National Intelligence Agency. That is the legal name. So you cannot just change that name without doing a constitutional amendment and a legal amendment, because that's an NIA Act. So to call it SIS is absolutely illegal. But yes, we've seen the NIA not actively engaged as before in illegal arrest and detention and torture and so on, which is positive. But then you need more than that to do necessary legal reforms, because until now the NIA is not transparent and accountable to anyone, probably except to the president. But it should be accountable to the National Assembly, which is not the case. All right. I mean, we cannot also forget to say the creation of the National Human Rights Commission is a positive move, probably one of the greatest positive moves we've registered. The creation of that law, the NHRC Act, as well as the creation of the institution. But by and large, I think the necessary legal reforms that got to be made are largely not done. There are a lot of laws in the areas of public finance, in areas of environment, in areas of local government, in the areas of human rights that need serious review, which has not been done. And of course, those institutions also remain, relevant institutions that need to be reformed, don't get reformed. So consequently, what you're going to have eventually would be these institutions going back to their usual malpractices, and we have seen that with the case of the police. The kind of arbitrary arrest that they do, and the kind of manipulation or that they do with the laws, in terms of infringing on the rights of citizens. So yeah, I mean, a lot more needs to be done. So I would say legal space is like this. But to also say, to a large extent, of course, I mean, the judiciary has enjoyed a lot more independence and freedom from interference from the executive, which is very significant, because ultimately the judiciary is what defines us as a civilized nation, that there is not going to be survival of the fittest, that people would not have to be forced to use the take the law into their own hands or things like that, because that's a judiciary you can trust and go and get justice. Yeah, but that judiciary itself needs huge reforms in order to make access to justice easy, affordable, and and readily available to most Gambians. So a lot of work needs to be done in that area. Yeah.
Very much, Mr. Jobarteh. But before you leave, we would just like to have one a final question with you in terms of human rights, and also we understand that the National Human Rights Commission has done a lot of has done a lot of how to call it, raised a lot of concerns in relations to the prison reforms and so on. And we also understand that you one time, I don't know whether you're still serving as a member of the prison reforms committee. We would like to know how far you have been in terms of prison reforms and things like that before you sign off. Mr. Jobarteh, if you're still with us.
Yes, let me say this quickly, because I got to leave. Apparently, I've been on a lot of programs today. Yeah, I was part of the prison reform committee, and I must say we did amazing work to review the Prisons Act, and not just to review it, but to even visit Mile 2 and Joshua prisons, so that we can see exactly the state of affairs, in these facilities, which are really horrible. And the report was eventually submitted to the Ministry of Interior. Since I think 2018, actually. So personally, I am shocked. I'm disappointed. That review of the act, which has been submitted to the government, still has not been taken to the National Assembly, so that we have a new Prisons Act, The Prisons Act, again, like the other laws of the Gambia, came out of the colonial time, and there were a few amendments here and there, but not really related to human rights, or did not secure the human rights of inmates effectively. So the review, we actually made sure we capture all of those essential elements, and not just to review it, but even to recommend that the prisons, mile two, should be closed down and relocated, because the location is not convenient, it's on a swamp, it's small, it's overcrowded, but also to recommend that even Joshua prisons, where you would have juvenile prisoners there, that should also be separated, because juveniles, by international law, juvenile prisoners should not be in adult prisons. In our case, Joshua has a facility inside for young people, and that is not supposed to. There is not supposed to be inside the same compound. They should have a separate juvenile prison completely, and this also would be in line with the Children's Act, which has also created, provided for the creation of juvenile prisons, away from adult prisons. So I think now is for citizens and everyone to engage the government to put pressure to take that review of the Prisons Act, to take it to the parliament, or they create their own bill. But then what remains, what is obtaining right now, should not be. Mile 2 should not be as it is, and Joshua and Janjambure prisons, they need serious reforms. Thank you.
Will allow you to, we will excuse you now, and thank you very much for that insightful conversation there. Just to remind our viewers that this was the Independence special edition. We had in our panel Dr. Ensa Touray, Madi Jobarteh, and also Mr. Sekuba, and Hassoum Ceesay as well. We were expecting Dr. Satang Nabaneh. Unfortunately, we could not. Our topic of discussions were centered around history, independence, leadership, and the governance also, and also the economy and the way forward. So thank you so much, Doctor, and to our listeners. Until we come your way, I am Sanneh. Do have a pleasant weekend. Bye bye.